Matt and Tammy with Facet, who are the prime consultants leading the comprehensive plan update. So you'll hear from a few of us today. So with that, we'll dive right in and start with just in a meeting and agenda, setting the stage here today. We just did our welcome and introductions. And again, thank you for being with us out of everyone's busy day. We appreciate it. We're going to start with giving a project background, an overview on the comprehensive plan update, just an overview on that process and how that relates to the EIS, and then how to participate and provide feedback. This will be a theme throughout the presentation here today. An overview of the environmental impact statement and SEPA and how that relates to the comprehensive plan project. And what we're ultimately talking about today is the EIS scoping. And then talking a lot about the study and parameters of the EIS, and then spending a lot of time at questions and answers, because we do want to hear from you and your thoughts. So we will roll into, we talked about our introductions and meeting kickoff, and then just housekeeping really quick. So this is a Zoom webinar, and for the presentation portion here today, at any time you can submit questions in the chat or the Q&A function. We have Tammy here on the call. You can reach out to her directly if you're having any technical issues or thoughts in the chat, as well as to her email, which is listed here. We do have video and audio turned off just to keep this presentation moving. And then again, written comments can be submitted for the duration of our presentation as well as after the meeting. We have a slide, a couple items throughout this presentation that talk about how you can participate through the EIS scoping window. And this additionally will be recorded and posted online, as well as any questions and answers that we hear today will be posted on the county's website, which we have lots of links throughout here today. And Tammy will be putting that in the chat, so you all have access to that multiple times through this presentation. Now, I know we do have one person who has called in, and we may have more. So I believe that Lori is the host, so she's going to unmute any callers at the Q&A portion, and then we can have an open dialogue and facilitate that at the end. Okay, so just setting the stage here on our meeting goals here today. Spokane County is hosting this meeting specifically relating to the State Environmental Policy Act and Environmental Impact Statement scoping process. So that's a subsequent action as it relates to our comprehensive plan updates. Matt is going to walk us through the update for the county's comprehensive plan, which is due in 2026 in June. And then we'll go over some milestones for the SEPA and EIS portion here today. We have lots of opportunities for you to stay involved and comment on key issues and concerns, whether that's the comprehensive plan or the EIS. But just reiterating that today our focus is on the environmental impact statement scoping and not the overall comprehensive plan process. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and Matt, just let me know as you need me to move through these slides here today and give an overview of our comprehensive plan update.
Thank you, Rachel. So I'm just going to run through real briefly what the comprehensive plan is, and then go over the kind of the timeline for the project and what's happened to date, and what the ultimate goal is, and how the environmental impact statement and the SEPA process fits within that context. So just as a background to the Growth Management Act, the Spokane County and all the cities within the county are fully planning jurisdictions under the Growth Management Act. That's a law that was adopted in 1990 and has been amended many, many times since, that seeks to guide growth and development and protect agricultural and natural resource lands. Those are kind of the pillars of the original pillars of the legislation, but additional goals and related requirements have been added over time. There are now 15 goals, which are listed here on the right-hand side of the screen. Urban growth, reducing sprawl, transportation, housing, economic development, property rights, permits, natural resource industries, open space and recreation, environment, citizen participation and coordination, public facilities and services, historic preservation, climate change and resiliency, and shoreline. Those last two in particular have been added as goals in the last year or two. Shoreline being that the shoreline master program, which is a separate planning effort the county has to undertake due to the Shoreline Management Act, which is about 20 years older than the GMA, but now has to that document and that plan now is considered an element of the comprehensive plan. And then climate change and resiliency, which we is obviously related to the work of the EIS, but more broadly is a new required element for this update cycle. The Growth Management Act requires jurisdictions to adopt a comprehensive plan and development regulations that are consistent with that plan to accommodate projected growth and development and protect environmental resources, natural resource lands, critical areas, and these plans are now updated every 10 years, and the horizon is 20 years. So this plan has to be adopted. The legislature actually just last a couple weeks ago updated the deadline. The deadline for adoption for Spokane County is now December 31st, 2026. The grant funding for commerce is on from the Department of Commerce, which is assisting with this project, is on a 2-year cycle that ends in June 30th. So that's kind of the deadline for the funding, but the county does have until December to adopt a plan. Next slide, Rachel. There are many elements, you can think of them as chapters that are required in the comprehensive plan, and they all have to be consistent with each other, so that you don't have a rural lands program that is inconsistent with the capital facilities element, for example. It also has to be externally consistent, meaning it's consistent with state law, countywide planning policies that you've coordinated with the cities. So counties have a special responsibility because there's cities within the county to kind of coordinate the work of all of those communities to make sure that the plans are not frustrating the aims of each other. Several of the elements that are going to be included in this update are listed on the screen here, including land use, which is kind of considered the umbrella element. So all the potential changes in land use come with knock-on effects to all of these other things, and how are you kind of balancing those with the land use changes that you need to make to accommodate growth and development. There's also capital facilities, climate change and resiliency, which, as I mentioned, is a new element this year. Economic development, housing, rural lands, transportation. There are a few others as well. These are the key ones that we're highlighting today. Next slide, Rachel. So the question that people always ask is, nice plan, what's it going to do other than sit on a shelf? And the important thing to remember about the comprehensive plan is that it is nothing without implementing regulations and infrastructure investment and other programs that the county and all the cities use to implement the policies of the comprehensive plan. The Growth Management Act is kind of like the overall the basis for this. There's also rules that the county and the cities have together for coordinating on countywide issues. Those are called countywide planning policies. The comprehensive plan has to be consistent with those and with the GMA, but then all of those requirements get funneled through the comprehensive plan, the goals and policies that result, and are implemented through the county's development regulations. That's things like zoning, dimensional standards, subdivision requirements, permit procedures, critical areas ordinance, and other related regulations. It is also implemented through funding decisions, financing decisions for transportation investments, for capital facilities upgrades, and other programs as well, like participating in grant programs with cities, voluntary conservation efforts that can be included as sort of mitigation to protect agricultural land from encroaching development. So these are all tools that the county can use to implement the comprehensive plan. And those all must be consistent with the plan so that when you adopt your plan, you have a short window of time in which to make sure that all of your regulations are consistent with that plan, so that you're in good standing with the Growth Management Act. Next slide. There are several high-level objectives to this comprehensive plan update. So as I mentioned, goals and policies are kind of the bread and butter of the comprehensive plan and direct the county to do specific things. And the regulations then implement those policies. There have been new state laws passed, new amendments to the GMA, and new case law, that's Growth Management Hearings Board cases that have affected what the county can and cannot do since the last plan update. It's also I'd also note here that the county has the last major plan update was more than 20 years ago. There's been some minor amendments since and some hearings board cases that have kind of walked certain parts of it back. But this is going to be the first major update in quite a while, so there's a lot that's changed. The critical areas regulations will need to be updated consistent with best available science. That's a term in statute, and our team is working hard to make sure that the critical areas code is up to date and takes into account all the best available science on things like riparian management zones and critical aquifer recharge areas, among other topics. And then this is the big one, and this is the one of the main reasons we have to do an environmental impact statement for this plan update, is that the planning environment around how you accommodate growth has changed in some pretty big ways. Specifically around housing. So the county and all the cities now have to plan for and accommodate growth that is related to housing units by income band, not just overall population. So it used to be that you could show that if you showed that you had enough housing units to house all the people that were in your population projection, you were good. That is no longer the case. You now have to show that you have enough capacity by income bracket. And that it leads to some necessary, looking at some changes to the future land use map, examining how what is actually the true capacity of the urban growth areas, and coordinating that with the cities who are also dealing with that same issue. So because of that change to the Growth Management Act to require to plan for housing by income band, we have to do a kind of a wholesale reevaluation of all the capacity and look at the future land use map and the urban growth areas to determine if adjustments to those are needed, and if there's any future land use map changes and therefore zoning changes that'll be needed in order to accommodate that growth. And then last but not least, despite all the requirements in the Growth Management Act, there is still a big element of community vision here. So it's balancing the changes to law and administrative code with the community vision and what people want to see. So while that goalpost kind of moves every time you do a plan update because laws have changed and there's new requirements, there is still a great deal of local latitude in how this works and gets expressed, on the ground when a plan is adopted and regulations implement it. So those are the overarching project objectives. Next slide, please, Rachel. And then we have a couple just these are graphics that show the overall process and how the EIS is embedded within this. So this is the kind of the overall timeline. And then we have a couple snapshots of this with some text that are a little more descriptive. I'll note that the process of this plan update actually began last year. The county hosted a kickoff and started laying some groundwork for this plan update. And this is really a 2-year project, at more than a 2-year project once you account for the coordinating work between the county and the cities that needs to occur in order to make sure everybody's using the same set of assumptions. So it's really like a 2.5-year project. It's a long time, but there's under the hood, there's like 30 things that need to happen within each of these phases, and then there's sub things that need to happen for all of those things, and it's a complex and multifaceted process. And the EIS is just kind of one portion of this. So what you see on the screen here is all of the phases of the comp plan update, starting with the work plan, developing the engagement plan, which happened last year. And then this winter and spring have really been devoted to doing some engagement around around the idea of placemaking, sort of how setting the stage for a vision of how development within urban development will occur within the county over the next 20 years. And then doing a lot of the analysis on issues like housing and land capacity and evaluating the current critical areas ordinance and doing a gap analysis and those types of tasks. We're also just beginning the process now of actually getting into the elements, the existing elements, doing a policy analysis and drafting some changes based on changes in state law. Wedged in there is this EIS, the SEPA process for the comprehensive plan update. It's all in the middle of the screen there in that kind of those purple colors. And this process, we'll highlight this in a couple, one or two slides from now, but just to kind of give you some timeline on this. So we're currently working on element updates. We've issued the scoping. This is the scoping meeting. There's a comment period for scoping. We also are engaged in the process of developing the alternatives, which Rachel and Clay will talk about in a little bit. The analysis of the alternatives and writing the draft environmental impact statement will be occurring the entire second half of 2025, which is also when the bulk of the work on the elements, the draft elements will occur. And so when the comment period opens for the draft environmental impact statement at the end of 2025, that'll also be the first time that we've got kind of a full proposed first draft of changes to the elements themselves. So that'll be a chance for folks to review not just the EIS, but also the rest of the comp plan. There's a lot of engagement that's going on here throughout. So this meeting is specific to the EIS, and there will be plenty of other opportunities to engage in the EIS process. Rachel and Clay will talk about that a little bit later, but I just wanted to, excuse me. I also just want to say for everyone that there are plenty of opportunities on the comp plan to engage as well. You know, we've had some workshops to date. We have some rural open houses happening this month. We'll have some more digital tools that are going to be rolled out over the next couple months to allow people to comment asynchronously on portions of the comp plan and on maps and on critical areas ordinance work and other aspects to the plan, as well as the elements themselves. So this slide is sort of if you zoom in on that first chunk of that timeline, sort of that mid 2024 through later this year, that's kind of highlights the work on the comprehensive plan aside from the environmental impact statement. I will note here that we're currently in the kind of the right two columns here, data gathering and analysis, and the draft comprehensive plan element analysis and revisions. We're kind of in that window right now where we're wrapping up a lot of the early data gathering and analysis, and we've finished the placemaking workshops and are going to be translating that into the alternatives for the EIS. But the work to do the element updates is going to continue, and there will be multiple opportunities for people to engage with that through the Planning Commission, Board of County Commissioners, other tools, outreach tools that the county will be employing in order to get those draft changes in front of the public. Next slide. This is that EIS process, which was that middle portion of that graphic from the two slides ago. You are here at the very beginning of the EIS process. So the scoping notice was issued April 29th. The comment period for the scoping runs through May 30th. And Rachel and Clay will talk more about how you can get involved there. But there's really there's 5 steps to this. There's the scoping, which helps us determine what is going to be studied. There's the development of the alternatives, which is informed by the data gathering work that we did under the comp plan, as well as the placemaking engagement. And that will help us create an environmental impact statement, which we will be drafting the second half of this year, that will study the environmental effects of several different alternatives, alternative ways of accommodating growth and development and different land use changes and development regulations changes that are associated with that. The Board of County Commissioners will select a preferred alternative this fall, and they will select that preferred alternative after having been briefed on the contents of the DEIS. And the DEIS comment period will be running December of this year through mid-January of next year. The county will accept comments for 45 days to ensure that all parties have a chance to review the analysis in depth. Next slide, please. And then lastly, this is kind of the back end of that first graphic, just some details on this. So the development regulations will need to be, consistent with the comprehensive plan. They will also need to incorporate everything that is selected within the preferred alternative. And so we don't totally know what code options are going to be selected. That's ultimately the Board of County Commissioners' decision. And so some of these things are just clean up and fixing known problems, but some of the new code that will need to be adopted, we won't have a firm handle on that until a little bit later, which is why this process is so long. So we've already started looking at existing code, but we won't know about a lot of it until the preferred alternative is selected. So the development regulations portion of this actually stretches for more than a year. You'll see on there it goes all the way from now essentially through May of 2026. And then lastly, the adoption, the process to review the final EIS and the final comp plan draft will be occurring January through June. And then again, I'll note that this is based on kind of the funding timeline from the Department of Commerce for comprehensive plan grants to the county. But the board does ultimately have until December of 2026 to formally adopt the final comprehensive plan. So there will be a lot of opportunities to engage. Rachel, turn it back over to you. Oh, I guess this is mine too. Um, so as I mentioned, lots of opportunities to engage. Here's the link to the website. I believe Tammy will also be putting that in the chat. There was a rural community forum in Valley Ford just yesterday afternoon. And there will be two more coming up. So that's kind of the upcoming engagement opportunities. Those are in-person sort of community open houses on the rural lands, which is one of the required elements. So those are the immediately upcoming events. There will be more. We encourage you to go to the county's website for the project to stay apprised of. You can sign up for their email list on the whole comprehensive plan periodic update, and you can also see the upcoming events and ways to participate at that location. I will now turn it back over to Rachel and Clay to talk folks through now that we're kind of zeroing in on the EIS portion of this. We've situated it in the broader context. What does this mean for you for the EIS?
Thanks, Matt. That was awesome. So we're going to start our conversation on the EIS by talking about our growth projections. And so as part of the comprehensive plan update and then leading into the environmental impact statement, we're looking at the 20-year population projections, housing, allocations, and employment growth. And so this is just a summary of some of the findings so far from the estimates of 2023 all the way to projection of 2046. And so you can see where the unincorporated areas of Spokane County are projected to be over the next 20 years. So with that, we're going to roll into our first slide here on how you can participate and comment relating to the EIS. Again, Tammy's going to be putting this in the chat here. There's a link to Spokane County's website, and this is how you can sign up for notifications, see all the public input activities for the comprehensive plan and EIS. But as it relates specifically to the EIS scoping, our comments here are due no later than May 30th at 5 p.m. And you have a couple ways you can submit these. You can submit via email to the email address listed here, 2026 complan@spokanecounty.org, or as well in writing to with the reference of 2046 EIS scoping comments to the Spokane County Building and Planning Office. And that address is 1026 West Broadway Avenue in Spokane. And I'm reading that out just because we do have some folks on the phone that can't see the screen. So we'll have this slide up one more time as we get towards the end of the presentation, but we do want to roll into some of the content here as we talk about the EIS overview and what the purpose is here. So we're going to set the stage here talking about, what SEPA EIS, it is a process and tool to analyze environmental impacts. We're coming up with alternatives and mitigation measures as we look to accommodate growth. And this also provides a roadmap for our elected officials and information to help support the decision making that those folks are doing to identify potential environmental impacts, whether those are negative or beneficial, of our major planning actions as we look towards the growth and future over the next 20 years and set that stage. So ultimately, it's a guide by highlighting impacts and recommending mitigation strategies as we look towards our land use. So relating SEPA EIS to the periodic update, the early direction to help set the scope, why we're talking to all of you today, is we're looking to study parameters for our EIS, and we'll get into alternatives in just a few minutes. But it does require an early understanding of the range of land uses and development regulations that are considered as we update the comprehensive plan. And it does include looking at urban growth areas, joint planning areas, as well as potential expansion or swaps of that land. So this is a more focused timeline looking at the EIS as it relates to the integrated plan. So we're at the first little dot here today, talking about the scoping. And again, this was released on April 29th and will run through May 30th. So we tried to get to you all early to have this conversation. We're looking at getting our final growth targets, which accommodate both the comprehensive plan as well as the EIS in June. And then setting our alternatives here with the SEPA, and we'll get into what that means in just a few slides, over the summer of this year. So all of your comments will inform what we look at for those alternatives, as well as a multitude of other things, such as where our growth is looking and where we should focus. We're looking to have a draft EIS in December. That lines up nicely with our comprehensive plan draft, which is in December as well. And then we roll into a final EIS, which is targeted for January. We've got a noticing comment period on the draft EIS that comes out in December through January. That informs that final document. And then rolling into our draft development regulations and final development regulations and final comprehensive plan, which is that June deadline associated with the GMA regulations. Oh, I went backwards. Sorry about that. So as we look towards scoping comments, these are some of the topics that we look at as part of an environmental impact statement. So we're looking at earth and soils, we're looking at topography, and then we get into water quality, such as groundwater, runoff, flooding, frequently flooded areas. We're looking at air quality, which includes greenhouse gas emissions and pollutants, plants and animals, habitat, species migration corridors. Transportation is a key component as well. So we're looking at circulation, transit systems, levels of service, and capacities. Land and shoreline uses is a topic that's really important too. So those are our critical areas, what types of land uses and densities, as well as shoreline management. I know Matt talked on that earlier. Population, housing, and employment is a really key component of just our comprehensive plans and EISs in general. So we're looking really hard at our forecasted growth, housing units and jobs, and where that will be focused, as well as environmental health. So these are things like hazards or noise, as an example, and then leading into public service and utilities, water, sewer, fire, parks, police. Can we service our areas? Clay, did you have something to add here? No? Okay, I just saw your face pop up. Okay, and so we wanted to include this slide as well as part of this presentation. Is Matt highlighted that there's a new element here for our comprehensive plan, this periodic update, which is our climate element and resiliency. And so this is an element, but it's really something that overarches our environmental impact considerations, as well as our entire comprehensive plan, whether it's an element or not. It touches so many things. And so we did want to highlight this image here is the wildland urban interface. So wildfires, and taking a look at that as it relates to our county. Just an example of one of those resiliency things that has been close to a lot of our hearts here living here. And so what we will be taking a look at is current conditions and alternatives with keeping that resiliency in mind, as well as the county is incorporating placemaking as a tool to deal with resiliency and how we utilize that as a tool. And then as well as just our whole comprehensive plan and EIS effort takes a look at evaluating displacement and vulnerable populations as it relates to our alternatives and growth here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Clay, and he's going to talk a bit about our study parameters and alternatives.
Great, thank you, Rachel. So the comprehensive plan update is such an important process for the county. It's your foundation, it's your roadmap for the next 20 years of growth, and engaging the community is so important in that, and the SEPA EIS plays an important role. So let's talk about this a little bit. The county over the next 20 years, and this is just the unincorporated county, will be planning for approximately 35,000 more people, 23,000 more new housing units, and 10,000 new jobs. That's significant. And SEPA provides not only a tool to be able to assess impacts, but it also provides an opportunity to assess kind of a range of options to accomplish those goals. Rachel, can we go back one slide? Oh, I think there's one slide. Okay, never mind. So as we're planning for more people, jobs, and housing, the SEPA provides us parameters or bookends that we can study. So we'll be looking at a no action alternative, which would mean how would growth trends happen if no regulations or zoning changed, no amendments were made, we weren't looking at a new climate element, and we weren't looking at planning for rural areas. And then we'll have two opportunities to have action alternatives. So we'd be looking at different ways to accomplish the goal of accommodating new growth while also considering the impacts on the environment. Now, this is really nice, so we kind of call them SEPA bookends, because the alternatives and then provide an opportunity to look at a range of different ways to accomplish your goals. It allows the community to provide input on different ways that the environment may be affected by different choices the county could make. And it also provides the county a variety of different options to be able to accommodate growth at the end of the comprehensive plan process. So it allows us to evaluate a lot of different ways to meet the significant growth that the county will be experiencing in the future. So making sure that we also have some alignment between SEPA and the Growth Management Act. The bookends for SEPA, so that range allows you to have a broad options for what you're going to adopt, but it also needs to align with our Growth Management Act requirements for housing and jobs and capital facilities and utilities, environmental regulations and climate element requirements. So it gives you the choices, but it has to also align with the Growth Management Act. Next slide. So we want to make sure that, as part of those study options, we're taking a look at, that does provide us that kind of room as part of this process to, make decisions at the end of the comprehensive plan. So if we look at different ways to meet growth goals, the community provides input into that process, and then that helps decision makers, the Board of County Commissioners, make decisions as part of the final comprehensive plan. That community engagement and interest can then be, you can provide input not just on one way to meet goals, but a variety of ways. But, again, we want to make sure we're staying within the bounds of our Growth Management Act requirements. Next slide. So let's take a little bit of what is an alternative. So when you kind of look at those bookends and the range of things the county might consider that we're going to be developing later this summer, a lot of that, the alternatives will be based upon comments received during scoping. Of course, we talked about the no action alternative that would assume that nothing changes and growth occurs exactly the same as it would under current regulations. And then we'll have like the two growth action alternatives, which gives you things to weigh. We can weigh the environmental impacts, we can weigh where growth would occur, how it occur, and then make sure that we're meeting all of our Growth Management Act obligations. So what would different actions look like? Well, they may include things like different development regulation changes, like height standards or the types of uses that may be allowed. We may be looking at different zoning changes, like rezones to land or amendments to zoning standards. We could be looking at things like adjusting the urban growth area boundaries or swapping areas, like areas maybe that haven't grown with urban growth over the last 20 years with areas where growth may be more appropriate. Under new housing element requirements, we're going to be looking at providing a variety of housing types to people that make different incomes. So that's a new requirement under the Growth Management Act, is making sure that we're not just providing capacity for more people, but we're really trying to make sure that we have zoning and development standards that align with housing that people can afford. So that's going to be a big piece of the plan. And then there are new requirements for looking at things like multimodal transportation. And then the environment is a big piece. So it's not just the environmental impacts of looking at different alternatives, but it also just, the big portion of the Growth Management Act is, protecting critical areas, water resources, and then a huge emphasis on our forest lands, farmlands, and mineral resource lands, and our rural lands. So making sure that growth that occurs aligns with the county's defined rural character definition, so that you have, so this is that game plan for the future, and the EIS can provide kind of that roadmap so that the choices that are made as part of the update get you from where you are to where you want to be in the future. Next slide. So it's a big thing, because if you want to participate in the comprehensive plan update, you know that all of the cities in the county are also completing their comprehensive plan update, planning for more people, jobs, housing, and all the infrastructure that goes around it to meet their goals: capital facilities, utilities, transportation. So I just wanted to highlight, now this isn't the entire county, but you can see that around Cheney and Medical Lake and Airway Heights, the city of Spokane and Spokane Valley, there's those colored areas around the cities, and those are the unincorporated urban growth areas. So when we look at planning for 35,000 more people, 23,000 more housing units, and 10,000 more jobs, there is a big choices of where those people may live in the future, the types of housing they may live in, where we provide jobs next to housing. And so the EIS is going to be a good way for us to evaluate different choices and the environmental impacts, and then that can align with our comprehensive plan and final decisions at the end of the process. And Rachel, I think I can turn it back to you to wrap us up.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Clay. So now that leads us into our questions and answer portion. And so if you would all like to type in the chat, that would be great. We do want to make sure we do a good job recording all of these. You can put it in the question and answer box or in the chat. I believe that's turned on now. And then Tammy's going to facilitate the questions as we get them. I also do want to leave up on the slide as well of how to engage and provide comments throughout this effort. So we don't have any burning questions, and we do have someone on the phone. So as well, if you have questions verbally, that would be great. It's a good time. Looks like we did get something in the chat. So the question is, how extensive will the transportation element be studied as part of the EIS?
Clay, do you want to answer that one?
No. Rachel?
Oh,
Rachel, Scott?
go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, the transportation is obviously one of the major issues. It's studied by our own internal staff, with David and Jamie and Barry, our transportation planners. We also coordinate with the cities, with SRTC, and with DOT. So there's a very well trod process for the transportation element to be integrated within the plan, and it's fully integrated into our thinking and our work plan.
Looks like we do have another question.
How will the EIS alternatives address alternative amendments to the UGA area? Will each include different possible UGA changes? Scott, that's probably a good one for you as well.
Right, and that is the, in terms of the timeline and process. So that is kind of a July, May to July to September frame to look at those alternatives based on what we see from our cities and the county growth with all of the parameters, housing, population, employment, as well as the traditional, well, I wouldn't say traditional perhaps, but the capital facilities elements. And notably, for our joint planning area with the city of Spokane, on the West Plains in particular, we have to address groundwater quality. We've got to address the contamination issues. We have to address the PFAS issues. So all of those are going to run into what growth areas are even eligible for consideration. You mentioned it before, Rachel. Our general hypothesis at the moment is any UGA boundary changes are likely to be swaps rather than expansions. The UGA itself will probably shrink in total acreage, but it will be better positioned to promote responsible growth. All of that will happen here in the next 5 to 6 months.
And Kevin, any changes might be part of one alternative, or there may be different ones that would be studied as part of more than one alternative. We'll make those decisions as we narrow down the alternative. So more to come on that.
There is one thing in the chat that I think is relevant to what we just talked about is it might help if the consultant could give some scoping examples. So is that something, Clay, maybe you can cover as some examples that, we may be looking at or others have?
Are we talking about types of scoping comments, like what we're asking for in terms of scoping comments, or alternatives?
My guess is what the alternatives are, is my guess, what the question is.
Yeah, so we'll be narrowing that down over the next couple of months, but it's looking at different ways. The alternatives will focus on different ways of accomplishing the goal of accommodating new population, housing, and employment. So alternatives could range from zoning changes or development regulation changes, which could increase capacity for population. It could be modifying zoning to provide for more housing types for people that make different income levels, so it accomplish the housing goals. It could be changing zoning requirements to make sure that we get the employment that we need and have that capacity for different employment. So we're not quite there yet, but it will provide a range of ways to accomplish meeting those overall targets. And then we can get feedback from the community on that. And then that provides, in the end, the commissioners would adopt a comprehensive plan which would provide that capacity to meet all of those targets, and that we would understand what the impacts on the environment of those choices are so we can identify mitigation and plan for those within the comprehensive plan. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, we have another one here. What impact does the tremendous lack of housing options affect your process, especially with so many problems in both the population projections by OFM and the long-term challenges with the LQA scoping using hypothetical versus actual lots available?
Well, it makes an otherwise complicated process even more complex. As Clay mentioned, we have these various variables that in the past were fairly straightforward, a straight line population projection, generating jobs, generating housing. Now those have to be broken down in housing, particularly by income bands. All of the cities are going through that analysis right now, and that will be, we'll have, if we have any results on that at our May meeting, we'll discuss them there, but we're really planning on discussing that at the July meeting of the steering committee. There's no easy answer other than we have a lot of these clubs in the air to be juggling, and we'll try to pull them together in alternatives that can then be out for public discussion. And that'll be certainly, we'll be talking to everyone from interested parties to neighborhoods to builders and developers.
And I think even just building on Scott, the housing element is requiring a planning for a greater variety of housing types. aligning that with incomes, as we've talked about. In terms of the land quantity analysis, there obviously is a difference between planning for growth and growth that actually occurs. There are check-in processes. There's going to be a new 5-year check-in on the comprehensive plan to discuss how growth is occurring in relationship to what is planned for. But there are also processes in the land quantity analysis with what are called market factors, because just because a parcels may show that they may develop during the planning period, there are kind of market factors say that not every lot is going to develop. And so that there is always trying to balance how much capacity we need for growth, and also making sure that you have to deal with kind of real world ups and downs of the market and housing needs. So it's not a perfect process, but I think that we've got a good grasp so that we can try to get zoning and development regulations that will be there for growth that's going to occur during the planning period.
Okay. National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, must adopt and enforce floodplain management regulations, which often involve coordination with FEMA. If a community fails to comply with NFIP requirements, FEMA may suspend its eligibility for flood insurance. What is Spokane's policy for disclosing flooding in the high-risk drainage areas? Where are the maps of the high-risk drainage areas? So far for this one, in the critical areas, we have the approved FEMA maps. In terms of the high-risk drainage areas, there are, in the West Plains, there were reports done. Those are not in the FEMA maps as of right now. I don't know if anybody else wants to address that.
Rachel, one of the things that we're looking to do is complete a more rigorous, thorough geotechnical study of the West Plains and its water systems. That, at least in the planning side, we haven't seen much of that information in the recent past. And so we'll be working with our public works, but also with state and federal officials, best available science, so that we've got a true understanding of what are the constraints that are provided by groundwater, stormwater management on the West Plains. And that also leads into the question of understanding better the distribution of contaminants and PFAS. It may be a never-ending study at some times, but what we want to do is have a better foundation for being able to guide development decisions in this first 5 to 10 years of a 20-year plan. So our position is we need to create a better hydraulic geotechnical foundation layer for our mapping to help guide discussions about what's going to happen on the West Plains, and frankly everywhere, but the West Plains is a huge priority area.
The county website states that prior to issuing a floodplain development permit, an environmental review under SEPA process may need to be completed. Moreover, FEMA's coverage typically focuses on damage through openings, i.e. windows and doors, rather than addressing issues arising from subsurface conditions or high water tables. This means that damage from groundwater or flooding that seeps through the ground might not be covered under the standard FEMA policies. However, for basement assistance, FEMA states funding will be provided only for repairs that make the house safe, habitable, and functional for essential living space. If another part of the home can be used to make it functional, funding may not be provided. And if a basement doubles as a bedroom when there is another available room upstairs, the policyholder will not be eligible for assistance, FEMA.gov, but the W2H second edition isn't on FEMA's flood risk map, and the homes are flooding from the ground up. Those with basements are SOOL. All of this will be addressed in the best available science and the gap analysis, and are more part of the regulations for floodplains. We most likely won't get too into the weeds on the EIS with this. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that. Yeah, so the best available science has been completed in draft form. We were able to find a lot of reports from different consultants and public works in the West Plains with some of the high-risk areas mapped. We don't have any shape files yet. We might be able to digitize some or find some from the consultants, and try to add those and make sure they're addressed in the frequently flooded areas portion of the critical areas ordinance. There's one that didn't get answered here about the number of alternatives, and I lost it. Where'd it go?
I can answer that in the
There's
question about the
two,
time.
yeah, 2 alternatives and a no action.
And then in terms of how long agencies will have to review the alternatives and provide their analysis for respective elements. So once we prepare the draft EIS, there'll be a comment period associated with the draft EIS where you can comment on the alternatives, or you can comment on the environmental impacts or anything you want to within the scope of the DEIS. So there'll be a 30 to 45 day comment period provided on the DEIS. However, there's going to be a significant opportunity to comment from after we get through with the environmental review. The preferred kind of choices for zoning or land use changes or development regulation changes will move into the comprehensive plan and the development regulations, and those will go through a significant review as well. So there'll be opportunities for public meetings and hearings with the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners. There'll also be a comment periods associated with those processes. So you'll have an opportunity to comment as part of the environmental review, and then as part of the public process for the comprehensive plan, which will incorporate the changes to meet future growth targets and meet all other requirements of the Growth Management Act. So there should be lots of opportunities. And then there was also mentioned there's a lot of engagement events throughout the process. So lots of opportunities to engage with the county and ask questions and provide feedback.
There was a subsequent question that was in the chat too that I think relates to this, Clay, is what kind of input is expected at this stage? And a question on that commenting is expected to hear what dimensions that were shown in our presentation that each commenter believes is most important. So maybe, I guess, framing what we expect as comments at this stage in the EIS.
Yeah, so I mean, we're really focused now on the, looking at what elements of the environment that we should be really looking at to, when we evaluate the growth that will occur. So we had a slide earlier in the meeting where we identified, and the scoping notes already identified, the county has identified another number of environmental impacts that will be studied as part of the update. Yeah, I think we had that.
Oh.
Right there. So we're already going to be looking at things like earth and water quality, air quality, plants and animals, energy and natural resources, and transportation, and on and on. So we've identified all of those, but the main purpose right now is to make sure that we're evaluating the right things. If you had concerns about, jobs and air quality, or you're looking at the transportation impacts, we're wanting to make sure that we evaluate the environmental impacts of different growth alternatives properly. So that's where we're at right now. And then there'll be plenty of time to talk about, like, did we identify the right mitigation for different choices? Do you like different land use choices or zoning choices or regulation? That'll be part of the comp plan. So this is kind of that first step of making sure that we evaluate the right different areas as we look at land use and zoning choices. And I think just going through what Paul, just following up on Paul, is he asked, should comments propose bookends or simply priority the commenter assigned to different components? I think we're just focused on really those environmental, those pieces of the environment that we had studied. Once we get to bookends, Paul, you'll have opportunities to comment on those bookends as part of the DEIS. So really just looking at those kind of environmental factors that we need to be looking at, depending on where growth happens, and then we can incorporate those and we'll apply those to the different alternatives. So wherever we've identified something that needs to be reviewed, then we would apply that factor to all of the different growth alternatives.
Rachel, one of our county staff had a question about how long will agencies have to review, and Clay got into that in a pretty detailed way. But we will be talking with the various agencies on a more or less constant basis as we work through what these alternatives are even going to look like. And so we'll be looking at, and we'll be talking with those various agencies on a more or less, like I said, a continuous basis. And for Dave and for others in the audience, those of you that are watching and are already upstairs in our building, you know where we are. We meet here in the studio every Thursday. So come on down with your questions on any day and we'll work on them.
Thanks, Scott. This is probably a question for you, Tammy, but in addition to mapping critical areas, what is your thinking about mapping and protecting migration and habitat corridors as well as connectivity?
Yeah, I just saw that. So we've been working with the Wildlife Department or Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and getting as many layers as we can. They have a working group and a website. We've been using Terradapt and just getting as much data as we can and hoping to really address that in that we've been working on it in the best available science and the gap analysis. It is a really important thing that we've been focusing on this time with the updates for the fish and wildlife habitat areas. So that'll be available to the public when it's finalized.
Tammy,
There are
would
also
you- Oh, go ahead, Clay.
requirements in the sorry, Matt. There's also requirements in the Growth Management Act that promote kind of the identification and preservation of open space, including corridors connecting urban areas. And those benefit recreation, but they also benefit, a lot of times those are critical areas in wildlife habitat corridors.
Tammy, I think we may also want to add here that while agricultural land is not synonymous with critical areas, that for some species, agricultural land does play a corridor role, and so part of this study may involve, it's not like you said, not necessarily a critical areas question per se, but a mapping and designation and just kind of recognition question of, if there are tools that are being examined to preserve agricultural land in certain locations, that you can kind of pair that with habitat in a way that acknowledges the role that agricultural land can play in some species habitat areas.
Yeah, and then to Garrett, I am going to ask for a couple of layers that I don't have access to yet. So I'll follow up with you after this for the ones I was hoping to be able to download. Here and open. Yeah, Terry, we're just gonna have to note a lot of these things. We're not yeah, I can read all of them out loud, but I think we'll note them and have them available tomorrow in the question and answers. But we appreciate all of the information on the high risk drainage areas and stormwater management issues. And making sure they're all noted.
Are there any other questions? Give it another minute as we close out. So as we said in the beginning of this presentation, the recording will be online at the county website. We'll also post the question and answers from this meeting. Probably early next week is my guess to have the team review. And there's lots of opportunities to participate. So please visit that county website and submit your comments no later than May 30th. This won't be your only chance to comment on the EIS. Any closing thoughts from the team as we give it another minute for final questions? Matt or Tammy or Clay, Scott and team?
It looked like there were some more things in the chat here from Paul.
I think we covered them if you're going back.
did. Okay, all right.
Unless they were directly to you, Tammy.
No.
Oh, we've got a hand raised from Lori. Go ahead, Lori.
No questions. That was an accident.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, from our perspective, thanks to everybody on the team, our internal planning staff and you, our consulting team. I think you covered a lot of information, opened a good big door for comments. We heard quite a lot from our residents and colleagues on the West Plains, and we'll be definitely prioritizing that. As well as the many things in here, those answers and results of those comments we will be posting, as you noted, Rachel. So this is it's the start of one part of the process and in the middle of the overall comp plan process. So we'll keep everybody as informed as we can through our web and other channels, and we look forward to continued interaction and comments and questions. So thank you all for your time. And if there's nothing else, I think we can wrap up.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Lori, go ahead.